Welcome back to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Sander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. This show is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. Katie Rohn is in the house. How are you, Katie?
Hi, I'm well. How are you, Emily?
I'm good. It's always good to speak with you. So we are here on podcast day, introducing you to our audience. So Katie and I are both, Katie is a former chief of staff at Google, and we are both coaches now who work with chiefs of staff on the regular. So we're going to discuss kind of Katie's background and her experience in the chief of staff role. And then we thought it would just be fun to have kind of like a brainstorming conversation around where the chief of staff role fits in one's career. And is that in the beginning? Is that toward the middle? Is that toward the end? And all the different permutations that can have. But Katie, thank you so much for taking the time and being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for our chat today.
Beautiful. Well, as I alluded to, you were chief of staff at Google. So tell the people, how did that happen? What was that like? What were you doing?
Yeah. So I was at Google for about 7.5 years before I went off to do coaching full time. And I moved through a couple different functions while I was at Google. Actually, I started in sales and loved it. I miss it some days. It was really, I love the people element of sales, and we had a really fun team. But while I was on a sales team, I was a manager. I was loving my day-to-day work and decided to take on a project, sort of like an additional project to my core role, supporting a very senior leader on our team with some strategic comms work. And that just sucked me in. I absolutely loved the work. And that's when the chief of staff role was really put on my radar as something that I could consider in my career. And the next role I took on at Google ended up being exactly that. And that was then I moved into more of the strategy and operations side of the business at that point. So I spent about half of my career at Google in sales, more customer facing, and then the second half in strategy and operations roles. Chief of staff was a formal title that I held, and then I was in other roles that were doing chief of staff things in other ways.
Acting chief of staff, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Just out of curiosity, so we've had a chief of staff from Google and Microsoft, and there were other chiefs of staff in the organization at these large corporations. Yes. We've had several multinational corporation chief of staff on, and it's interesting to me. Sometimes they're like, it's kind of by region. It's kind of by preference. Like if a principal wants a chief of staff, they get one. If a VP or up wants one, sometimes they're called chief of staff. Sometimes they're not. At your time in Google and in the department or division you were in, how did that work?
Yeah, within my organization, leaders at a certain level or with a certain title had a chief of staff. Mm-hmm. So I think there were about, I might get this wrong, like 6 or 7 of us that were like officially within the specific organization that I was a part of. And we'll probably get into it because we love talking about this. But it was so interesting to see even then, right? Like so many other chiefs of staff within the same organization, within a larger company, having such different experiences, right? Like there were some parallels that we all navigated together, and we could collaborate in those ways. But I remember feeling like, oh wow, this is so interesting. Like we really are all experiencing very different things. And therefore, like one solution is not just going to fit everyone. And I've taken a lot of that experience into the way that I approach coaching with a lot of my clients.
Different chief of staff versions, even within the same company, even within the same area of the business. So
exactly.
Interesting. Did your principal, were they familiar with chief of staff role and how to fully optimize that? Or was it a bit of learning as you go?
Yes. My principal was, and it's interesting that you asked that question because I talked to so many chiefs of staff that have various experiences of that, right? Like some people are chief of staff or principal where it's their first time. Others are chief of staff or principal where they've, had many chiefs of staff.
Yep.
But then there's like all the experiences in between, like maybe a principal has moved to a new organization or moved to a different role, right? They're experiencing new people. Like there's always some variables that change it up in between. So yeah, I had the experience where my principal had worked with the chief of staff. And so I think that helped for sure in us being able to navigate that relationship. But it was my first experience as a chief of staff. So there was a lot of work I had to do to figure out what that looked
Ah, yeah, yeah. What types of things were you doing? Just a few handful of examples maybe of what you would do as a chief of staff at Google.
like. Yeah, there was a lot of, I would say, a lot of business operations work. So there were some more senior members of the team, like that I reported into, that worked on a lot of the strategic work. And then I really helped with the execution of
Mm,
that work. And then there were also parts of my work that were focused on culture. And I loved that part of the role. So I would say like between those two, there was a lot there. And then just overall, like I think this probably fits into a lot of like the business operations and business management, but running the weekly leadership meetings
yep.
and any sort of leadership offsites or workshops that we would do together.
Yeah, and I remember when I came in as chief of staff, no one at that was the first chief of staff ever. No one knew what the heck that was. Some people had a really big problem with what the heck is Emily doing. Some people were like, "No, I see what she's doing. Oh no, she adds a lot of. Oh, keep doing that, please. You
Yeah.
help me." But there was a pretty broad range of opinions about who this chief of staff was and if the role was valuable. I was wondering, what was the response or just reaction from your team or your peers or the people maybe in other departments that you were working with where it's like, oh, okay, Katie's here and she's so and so's chief of staff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is so interesting because there's so many different relationships that you're navigating as a chief of staff, and there are variables at play, whether it's maybe they're new members of a leadership team, or maybe a company has gone through a reorg, right? There are all these variables at play that are affecting your role as a chief of staff and maybe how familiar the people around you are about what your role is. And so I think cultivating those relationships is so important. I talk a lot about this in my work as I coach people, which is there are sort of like three external relationships that you navigate as a chief of staff, if you were to like really kind of bucket them. And then there's one internal relationship, which is the relationship with yourself. And that's where you do some work on what your needs are, what your vision is, what your goals are. But the external relationships are your principal, the leadership team, and the broader organization. And I like to think of it that way. And with my clients, they find it very helpful because it does sort of break it down in a way where you can like really diagnose, where am I at? Like how healthy are each of these relationships, or where do I need to spend more time, or where maybe there are gaps people don't understand the work that I'm doing and it'd be really valuable if they did. Um, and so I like to break it down in that way. And that was definitely also came out of what I experienced in my role as, like reflecting back now, I'm like, oh, if I had focused on these as like compartments and like maybe even started with myself and said like, okay, what do I need? Or like, what are the limiting beliefs that I have? Or like, what narratives am I telling myself each day that I'm then like taking into work with me and bringing to each of those relationships? So I find that helpful. And I would say to address your question, it is so essential to invest in those
Yeah.
relationships.
2020 hindsight is just such a tricky thing. It's beautiful sometimes. It's like, oh, come on. Like, I wish I could have done that over, but I have plenty of those from chief of staff and other parts of my life. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, and what a gift to be able, especially for us having experience in the chief of staff role and similar roles, to be able to look back and think about what we might have missed or what we would have done differently, and then how we can bring that to our clients or help guide our clients towards some of that insight.
yeah. And I want to talk about your transition to full-time coaching. I mean, thinking of 2020 hindsight, looking back at your chief of staff role now, what did you learn or what were the pieces that were memorable and kind of bubble to the top now that you have a little bit of space from it?
Yeah. Well, I feel like um, reflecting back, right, you can start to connect all these dots and paint this picture a little bit more. You're like, oh yeah, like that's the story. I get it now. Um, but I would say that the through line from my experience as a chief of staff up to where I am now, and I even felt this earlier on in my career, but I think it really started to make sense while I was a chief of staff, is I really love being an enabler for others to do great work. And I think this is what attracted me to the chief of staff role in the first place is um, I believe in really strong leadership. And I think being able to support a leader and a leadership's team is um, an incredible opportunity. And I sort of bring that same mindset to the work as a coach, like being able to enable others and support them to navigate their careers or find greater fulfillment in their careers or reach that big career milestone is that is huge for me. And I think that's what guides a lot of that's what's guided a lot of my career decisions
Yeah.
since that chief of staff role.
That's so funny because I also resonate with the behind the scenes person. And I remember early in my career, I thought you had to be the big gregarious, like, I love people and being on stage and the lights and the attention. I'm like, I don't, I mean, I can try to force myself into that, but that's not me. And then once I realized, oh no, first of all, you can be a leader in a whole bunch of different ways, but there's
Yeah.
also this whole kind of echelon of people who make a career out of being the behind the scenes people in multiple capacities. And in some ways, chief of staff is like the penultimate, like behind the scenes strategist. And you can, force multiplier and all those different things where you can optimize that thing and unlock your entire executive team where, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 equals 25, So I think I love that aspect of it. In your career, where did the chief of staff role fit in? I think did you make the jump directly from Google to coaching, or was there one stop in between?
I had a stop in between where I was doing some chief of staff like work. I was focused very specifically on sales enablement, which is where I feel like it was interesting because I was doing some chief of staff like work and focused on how we enable sellers to
Mm.
do great work. So, sort of where I felt like so many parts of my career were coming together, like having the sales background, having the chief of staff background and and coaching. I mean, this is where coaching also started to come through. Coaching is a powerful tool for sales enablement, and so that's where it all really came together. It's like all these gifts along your career, like you collect these insights, right? Like not every career decision you make is maybe the
Super.
best thing, right? Like you may take some wrong turns, but I think being able to look back and appreciating all of that as incredible insight that gets you closer to where you want to go. I completely feel that way.
Yeah.
So
I I call my wrong turns the scenic route. I just took the scenic route to where I was trying to go. Um,
yeah, I
but you
love that.
but you also mentioned I love that you said the internal relationship you have is always with
Yeah,
yourself. And if we apply
yeah,
that to 2020 hindsight, it's, "Hey, what did I learn from that quote unquote, left turn or wrong turn or scenic route?" I've made some turns like that where I was like, "Ooh, ooh, that let's go this way," but I learned the
yes,
most from those
yes,
experiences, right? It's like what wise people in wisdom says forever, and you read it in like a fortune cookie, you're like, "Yeah, whatever." It's true, like, it's really true. You learn so much from those experiences. So, do you was there, like, one moment when you're like, "I'm gonna make the leap to coach it," like, this is it," or was it just the slow build and culmination of, "This is the next step here?"
yeah. It was more of the latter. I would say it was more of the slow build. What I was feeling was, um, how they say there's like a push and a pull when you're making a career change, right? You feel the push, and then usually you should feel like the pull in a specific direction. And I say to some clients, like, if you're just feeling the push, like, let's talk about that. Um, for a long time, I was feeling the push, like I was ready for um, something different, being creative in different ways, different environments. I was also making personal changes in my life to move to a different location. And I wasn't entirely sure over, series of months where that pull really was. And coaching was on my radar, but I was sort of like, is that I don't know, like, could I do that? And so there was a lot of back and forth there. And it was when I went through my coaching training and I got to experience coaching much much closer, and I got to experience coaches that were out there doing this work that showed me what was possible and inspired me about like what I could be doing. And I think that's really what gave me the little like the nudge, like solidified the pull, like this is the direction you want to go in.
And
So
then
yeah, but it was a slow build. Yeah.
gotcha. And then just quick recap, who do you work with? What does that look like now? I know chiefs of staff are in the mix, but just kind of the
Yes.
overview.
Yes, I work with generalists that are navigating various career transitions and telling their story around that. I work with a lot of people that have a fair amount of experience. Maybe they're mid or later stage careers, and sometimes they've sort of fallen into a career and they've continued to get promoted and grow their career in that space, but they've hit a point where they're realizing it's not necessarily for them, that they really want to sort of like take the wheel and go in a slightly different direction. And so I work with especially generalists, like helping them tell their stories around that. And I have experience with that too, right? Like not necessarily being a specialist where it's easy to be like, here's all the things that I've done, here's the value that I've added. And sometimes you have to get a little bit creative, and in this job market. So I work with a lot of people that are navigating that. I sort of break it down into vision, mindset, and action. And so I love helping people figure out the vision that they have for themselves. And sometimes that takes a little bit of work. It takes pause, like time to pause and slow down, actually reflect on that. And we don't always have those moments in life, or, sometimes our lives aren't really set up for that. And so that's why I think coaching can be really powerful. The mindset piece is one of my favorite parts, is because this is where you get to really navigate some of what I was talking about earlier, some of the limiting beliefs or the narratives that are maybe keeping you stuck or keeping you from getting to that vision. Right? Like you have to sort of align to the vision and figure out what is the mindset I need to have to get there, or what do I need to be aware of to get there. And then the last piece is the action. I love strategizing with people. Like this is where we get creative and we experiment, and I love that work. So those are kind of the three buckets. And then as you were mentioning, I specifically work with chiefs of staff as well, which is so much fun to like revisit the role in this capacity as a coach. And as I mentioned earlier, I work with a lot of chiefs of staff through the lens of those four relationships. And I like that as a framework because it is very much tailored to the individual and what they are experiencing. And it's not like, here's this one size fits all, this is how you do it. And so there's a lot that gets unlocked through that, especially in the relationship with yourself, right? As I was saying earlier, like when you can invest in that with a coach or with whomever, so much unfolds beyond that in the other relationships that you have at work and maybe even beyond.
Yes. And oftentimes people spend a lot of time and focus on the external relationships and not on themselves, which can get out of balance.
Yeah.
But for the brain,
Especially for a chief of staff.
oh, for sure, it's
Right?
so easy to get sucked into. So easy to get sucked into.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because I mean, like by nature, that is part of the role is what you're responsive, you're like sometimes reacting, right, to all these things that are people and environments that are around you. And the to-do list can stack up really quickly with a lot of that stuff. And it can be hard to like come back to yourself when you're in that environment.
mm, to come back
So
to yourself. Yeah. Yeah. So like a quick brainstorm here.
yeah.
Just like throwing it out there. Like what have you seen in terms of the career trajectory and immediacy versus long-term focus for people in and out of the chief of staff role?
Yeah. Well, so a few things that I've observed. One is that a lot of chiefs of staff enter this role without knowing what they want to do after it. I think you and I have talked about this a little bit. I actually find this a little bit surprising, although I did the same thing. I thought I was just like doing it wrong, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of advice out there that you should kind of know what you want to do after it, so you can go in really like with that goal in mind. But I think it makes a ton of sense because I think one of the beautiful gifts that a chief of staff role offers is that you get exposure to so many different things. And that exposure is insight, right? Like you get to take in what's happening around you, digest it, and decide like what's for you and what's not. And I think that's really powerful. I mean, when I reflect back on my career, I think the chief of staff role was one of the most powerful roles in terms of ones that like really gave me clarity around like where to go
Mm.
next and where to sort of steer the career. So, um, I think that's a really interesting part of what so many people are navigating this role is that they maybe not stepped into it, not necessarily knowing what comes next, maybe having a few ideas, but wanting to get more clarity as they move through the role. And I think that can be a great thing, but to do it really well, I recommend balancing that internal and external, right? So recognizing what's happening around me, what am I taking in the external environment, but also like what does this mean for me as like a unique person and what I want in my career and in my life. And sometimes that takes some reflection, that takes some slowing down, that takes some you know, working on that relationship. Um, so I would say um, I think that's one of the very interesting parts of like what career growth looks like in this role.
Yeah, for sure. Where do you tend to see people go after a chief of staff role?
You know, kinda all over. I mean, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this. I usually have this conversation with people around, do you kinda wanna, like, stay a generalist, or do you want to become a specialist? And I think that can look different, you know, based on what the individual wants, but also based on where they see growth for themselves, maybe in their current environments, even like within the company that they're in, right? Like, what does that company value more? Like,
Yeah.
where's growth? So I would say, like, if someone's growing as a generalist, maybe it's going into more like senior chief of staff roles, or maybe you're like moving to a different chief of staff role at a different company, right? Um, or other generalist operator roles. And then you have the specialist side of things where I've seen chiefs of staff move into leadership roles for a very specific function, right? Like maybe they had a ton of exposure to that team or to that function through what they were doing as a chief of staff, and then they move there. So some becoming entrepreneurs, some becoming coaches, right? So um, I see a lot of different directions. I'm curious what you see in your
Yeah,
work.
I mean, it's all over the place. So I think for me, it's interesting. I guess it's about a 50-50 split of people who are going into the chief of staff role very intentionally, like for a reason, for a purpose, and then some who are like, "I guess I'm a chief of staff now." Like someone voluntold me to like go do the chief of staff thing, so I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But it's
Yes.
it's interesting. I've had folks go, I'm going to be a chief of I've had people be like, "I wanna be a career chief of staff. Like, this is my jam. These are my
Yes.
people. This is my skill set, my strength, etcetera. I wanna be a chief of staff in different companies for the rest of my career." Great. And I have people going, "I want to," like you said, "be an entrepreneur. I wanna be a founder and start my own company." The best place for me to learn about all aspects of the business is by being chief of staff and by being right next to a principal who's making the decisions that I would have to make and seeing how that works behind the scenes. I've
Yes.
had people who come from the investment side of like PE, and PE is
Mhm.
like, I need you to get operational hands on experience. So go get a chief of staff role at one of our portcos for 18 months and then come back to the firm side. And then I, have people were like, I interviewed for a role. I thought it was this, at the last minute, they called it chief of staff. So now I'm a chief of staff, Emily, what do I do?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." All these different ones. And then, like you said, I've seen them go to COO, I've seen them go to, the product side, kind of HR or general business operations, VP of strategic initiatives, just kind of all over the place from there. I like what you said, though, about there's the internal reflection piece, and if you know yourself and learn more about yourself, it's kinda like a parallel path where external things are happening, careers moving, companies are going in one direction, teams are going in one direction, and then how am I growing as a person? Like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I like this type of work, not that type of work. I like these type of people, not this type of people," and
Yeah.
kind of mixing the 2 as you make your career moves.
Yeah. Well, and I think it can be really challenging when the environment that you're in, say it's an organization that you're a part of, values something that you're not necessarily feeling connected to in terms of maybe like options for growth. Um, and I think that can be a hard reality to face as a chief of staff is like, do I want to honor what I need? And that might mean leaving or going somewhere else so I can follow that thing that's important to me. Or am I going to follow the growth of what's happening in the external environment?
Yeah.
And maybe the external and maybe that the latter is what's best for that individual and their reasons for that. But I think acknowledging that too, like when you feel like there's misalignment between what you want and what the environment is directing you towards, and just being able to notice that and get honest with it and realize what's best for you.
I think that's culture. Is that like like your environment and what they value at this company, and then what you value, that's like a culture fit to me.
Yeah.
It's like it might not be it's not saying it's a bad company or a bad person per se. It just might be misaligned. It's like I'm gonna be better suited over here. So I think that piece is important. And I also think I like the like what do you need right now? You might need to learn how to operate in this type of environment. And that's just, you got to, if you're early in your career and you're kind of like, whoa, this is a lot, but like I have to go through it and I have to learn it. And this is a good way to learn it, trial by fire or exposure therapy or whatever. That might be the best thing for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I feel like this part always gets so tricky with career navigation because um, there are maybe certain, let's say, values that you want to honor for yourself over the course of your career. And then in like what I would maybe put in a separate category is priorities.
Mm.
And the priorities shift, right? Like at some points in your life, certain priorities are gonna be above the others. Um, and that I feel like that's a thing that you have to like keep checking in with,
Because it
right? Is like,
changes.
is balance important to me right now? No, okay, I'm gonna take that job that maybe I won't have that as much. Um, or is leadership important to me? Right. I think there are all these priorities that maybe shift over the course of your career. And then maybe they're like, values we can, whatever we want to call them, that kind of stay consistent over the course.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Yeah, I'm like trying to, like a value of mine would be like integrity. Like I'm not going to cheat or steal or embezzle or backstab someone. So that's been consistent through. I hope for other people as well through my career. But
Yeah.
early in my career, like I wanted money. I want a
Yeah.
comp package. I want a title. Like give me those things, and that did not stay consistent. So mid career, late stage career, it was I want influence. I want to be at the table where decisions are being made. You don't have to take my idea every time, but I want to at least have a voice at the table. That was really important to me. And then, like now, it's giving back and enabling others, and coaching and all these different things. But and I remember someone when I was like 20 saying, Emily, when you get to be older, you might have a different outlook and things. Your priorities might change. And I was like, no, no, they won't. They will never change. And I was like, oh, that person was right. So I think I love what you said, just checking in because the answer can change. It will change just as you live your life.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
so true. And like, it's really cool to hear you talk about like that. I mean, what a powerful compass that you have that's guiding you towards like all of these decisions that you're making about your career.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think a lot of people, at least in my coaching, like it sounds like yours too, like don't take the time to think about those things. And so they're kind of like swirling around and they're unmoored and aren't centered in like, this
Yeah.
is me. This is the core of who I am. And you can't rock me off dead center. Like this is just like I'm settled in, I'm sitting into who I am. I know who I am. And so I'll make decisions as they unfold and present themselves, but I'm not being like swept away by something and then this person's opinion and then this environment and then this event type of thing. That's different.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true 'cause there's so much external noise,
Totally.
and that I feel like can if we aren't checking in with ourselves or creating that time or space, um, it can get really murky. It's like, "Well, what do I actually want? Like, do I want that thing that people are telling me that I should want?" Or I don't know. And so I think that's where, um, just being able to differentiate between the 2, right? Like, okay, that is like an external thing that's coming to me. I'm going to decide if that's for me or not. Like, is this useful information or is this something I want to get curious about? Um, but I think it can be really tricky. I mean, I just wrote a LinkedIn post about sort of this earlier this week about external validation because I was noticing with a lot of my clients when they were getting very positive external validation, they felt really good about themselves. They felt super confident, especially job seekers. And then when there was nothing, when there's crickets, like inbox not very active, there was all this doubt that was creeping in. That was like, oh, did I mess up that interview or right? And so I think it's such an interesting conversation to have when it comes to career, whether you're navigating interviews or promotions or transitions or whatever that growth looks like, to notice that there's sort of like an internal and an external, and the external can be really helpful, right? Like we need other
Yeah.
people to grow. Those are really wonderful support systems. Um, but again, like coming back to that balance of like making sure there is the internal too. I'm just using like the internal and the external. I just find that like the easiest way to phrase it.
Yeah.
But I do think, yeah, the noise can get very loud and I think it can be disorienting. So creating that balance between the 2, I feel like is a very, applies to chiefs of staff, but really anyone.
Yeah. What are you seeing in terms of like guidance for people and the chief of staff role? So where would you place the chief of staff role in someone's career? And I think it can depend. I've seen chief of staff interns where it's like, "Whoa, you have a chief of staff internship right out of school or while you're in school." And then
Yeah.
I have, chiefs of staff at Fortune 50 companies who this is like the penultimate role in their career, and they're directing global operations. And I kind of talk about it with clients around things like chief of staff, in my experience, is not a 9 to 5 job. So, like, you kind of have to be all in as chief of staff. So, there's these intangible elements around the role you should consider, not necessarily like it has to be in this sequence in my career. But what are you hearing?
Yeah. I mean, this is where I feel like it varies so much, depending on the chief of staff role. But I think there's a good conversation to be had here because I think there's so many interesting variables at play. It would it would be so helpful to know this earlier on in my career, like what this looks like. But so here's some of the things that are coming to mind for me. One is right, you can have chiefs of staff that are very junior, and you can have chiefs of staff that are very senior, and those look very, very different. And the roles themselves look different, and then like the companies may look different, the principals are different, the teams around you will be different. For a more junior role, at least in my experience, there have been more senior chiefs of staff involved
Hmm.
and also um, working with that principal or with that leadership team. And so for that role, you're getting a ton of exposure. You Yes, maybe you're working beyond the 9 to 5, but maybe there are also other people playing roles there. especially when it comes to like some of the big strategic work at play. Um, and then you have like some of those more senior roles where, yeah, that might be the case. But again, I feel like a lot of it comes back to the principal and their style, and even your relationship with the principal. Like I feel like I've heard of some chiefs of staff that have really close relationships with their principal, um, and relationship with the leader team, like how big the broader team is, right? Like, so I feel like at startups, like a chief of staff role may look very different than at like Google, where I was, in terms of like what you're owning and what your priorities are. So, yeah, I feel like lots of thoughts there.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I think I like what you said though about the relationship piece. So in a big way, this is a relationship-based role. And all roles have relationships in them, but this is kind of a unique
Completely
relationship-based role.
agree. Completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like my advice, if we were going there, like my advice to someone considering a chief of staff role would be to evaluate what those relationships will be like all the different dynamics at play. Um, because I think that's a good indicator of what the role will be, like how they will experience the role.
And I think it's like, who do you want to invest in, and who is going to invest in you? And what's
Yes.
needed in that exchange or in that relationship just evolves and is dynamic over time. So, I mean, if we're talking someone in their early career, first job out of school, that's a different scenario than, "Hey, I've been doing this 30 years. I have so many reps under my belt, and now I'm going to step into a chief of staff role." That's just same things. Relationships, principal dynamics,
Yep.
investing, but just a different mix. Yeah?
Yes. Completely. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that is it. It's always so interesting to me as well, thinking about moments where a principal, I've heard of situations where a principal sort of reaches out to someone that they want to be their chief of staff, right? Versus someone that's like coming
Okay.
and saying, raising their hand, be like, I want to be a chief of staff, and then meeting the principal from there. Or situations where a chief of staff, maybe a principal reaches out to someone to be their chief of staff. They have a strong relationship. And
Mm.
then there is a change in leadership and a new person comes in and that they're now like assigned to that chief of staff. So I always find that interesting too, right? Like you can think about the relationships um, as you're about to step into a role, but acknowledging that, especially in chief of staff roles, things change so quickly. And like the evolution of that job description from like when you first
Ooh,
saw it to maybe like 6 months into the role may be completely different depending on, again, some of these variables, like, the stage of the company or principal or leadership team.
totally. Yeah, and I've seen chiefs of staff who, they stick with one principal. If the principal goes, they go. It's kind of a package deal. And then I've seen several scenarios where principal is ousted for whatever reason or leaves. Chief of staff stays, and a big part of their job in conjunction with the board is to successfully onboard the new CEO, the new president or principal.
Yes.
And the chief of staff is instrumental in that because they know who's who, they know the processes, they know what happened before and why, what worked and what didn't, and they can get that new CEO, let's say, up to speed real quick, very
Right.
quickly. Um, yeah, but that is interesting. I'm trying to think about if folks are, let's say, like, there's so many scenarios, but if someone's sucked into a chief of staff role where it's like, "Hey, merger happened, reorg happened, they made me a chief of staff, what do I do with this?" Like, what would you say to a client who is coming to you with with that scenario?
Yeah. Again, I would go back to those relationships. So this is where I think about assessing where you're at with the relationship with your principal. Maybe it's a new principal, their leadership team, the broader organization, the people within that, and then the relationship with themselves. So like, and that relationship to yourself in a scenario like that could be like, what is your internal narrative around this merger? Or what are your beliefs or thoughts about this? Like, are you already coming to conclusions around what this means for you? Or this is going to be so hard? Or right, like maybe there are already some things that are happening inside your brain that are then getting translated into how maybe you're approaching the role or relationships with people. But I think this is where you can start to evaluate, what do I want this relationship to be like with this person? Where am I at now? What do I need to do for this to be the most effective relationship for everyone involved,
Yeah.
to reach our goals here? So those are my thoughts. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I think, like, I'm kind of hearing as we're like, our main takeaways might be there's this experience lens and relationship lens. So if you're sitting there going, like, I'm thinking about being a chief of staff, or I've been a chief of staff, do I want to do it again?
Mhm.
Maybe think of it through, what is the best experience for me right now? Like, gaining certain types of experience, and also
Yeah.
like the experience of like going through it, right? So like, what am I able to do right now? What's going to be good for me and what's going to be good for others?
Mhm.
And And then there's the relationship lens where, okay, what kind of relationships is this? Do I think this is going to be, if I go this route, what kind of relationships am I going to create, build, maintain,
Yeah.
enhance, all those different things, and kind of using your four-part relationship piece there. But and if you look at it through those lenses, the answer will differ for everyone, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, some people will be like, I'm out, then I'm out. I don't like that experience. I don't like those relationships. I'm done being chief of staff." Cool. Some
Yeah.
people might go,
Clarity.
"Woohoo, like,
Clarity.
I'm doing this forever and, like, different permutations, and then I'm gonna go do this over here and get this industry experience. I wanna work with these types of principles. I wanna
Yeah.
support a CEO and then a CTO and then a president and then nonprofit and then for profit." So I'm just, there's no cookie cutter answer, like you said before, but I think these 2 lenses will get you to a good answer.
Yes. Yes. Because a lot of what you're saying is making me think just how much is out of the chief of staff's control. Um,
Be
but they have to
adaptable.
do so much, right? Like, there's so much that's out of your control that is also kind of your problem,
Yeah, yeah,
um, or like your responsibility.
yeah. Well, I think, like, my answer to, is this just a short-term role or early stage role versus could this be a long-term thing, is it can be both. I mean, for different people, it's just gonna mean different things in their career, and that's totally fine. There's no, that doesn't make it you're doing it wrong. It just makes it, are you being intentional about the role in your career? Or if you've been kind of shoved into it, are you making it the best experience you can with what you have, and you're making the best relationships you can while you're there, type of thing?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think here's the beauty of the fact that this role can look very different and depending on where you are, and the fact that it is emerging all over the place, is that I'm very hopeful that if someone loves the chief of staff work, you can find the right environment that works for you. But a lot of that just takes understanding what that environment needs, like what are your environmental needs around that?
Yes.
And that's back to the internal stuff, like knowing what you need, knowing what's important to you, knowing how you operate best. And I'm hopeful you can find that there's, if you have that compass.
And if you need help finding that, Katie can help you. So, Katie, where can people find you?
People can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the best place. And then you'll find all my things from there.
Beautiful. We'll have that
Yeah.
link in the show notes. But Katie, thank you so much for joining. I've enjoyed our discussion and just back and forth, and we'll see if this is one of many conversations.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Emily. This was so much fun.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.